A warm welcoming you back to this program, ThinkTech Hawaii, and this show, which is Humane Architecture. This happening to be a very special number. This is number 360. So we're going to do a 360, and we're going to have a very special happy hour for this. Our guest is Thomas Auer. Hi, Thomas.
Hi, Martin. By the way, do you know that when I was teaching in the US, happy hour was the nickname students gave me?
You gave me a hint about it, and that was at Yale. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that's where you were as well as at other places. So hopefully this can turn, Thomas, into you being often or more than this time on ThinkTech Hawaii, and hopefully we can make this program here an outlet for shift that we will talk about. And so this is just basically setting the stage for that. I'm just going to let these pictures here run through. It is, you are a founding principal of Transsolar, which we call a bioclimatic engineering firm. And then TUM, the Technical University of Munich, was smart enough to snap you and drag you into the academe, into pedagogy. And then very recently, you have been looking at yourself and people around yourself, including me, and saying, where have we all gone with this? Maybe with good intentions, but maybe a little too far or even in the wrong directions. And that's what you're sharing with the emerging generation and the profession. And that movement is called Shift. And as part of Shift, you have also been very welcoming to our Hawaii students and had them visiting last fall. And this here is their final field trip, which we said, why don't they go to Bad Aibling? And going here, they went from the train station to the project that you said would be a good idea to look at. And here they are. In this case here, it's Ty and Lawrence. The other ones were out and about. Michelle was already back. And so the mayor of Oberhaching was also proud to say that he welcomed them here in his small town. Ty here, you want to share what Ty told you over the Christmas party when you had invited them over about that sort of moment here of when he was walking by? Do you recall? Or
yeah, that was funny because like Martin, you invited me to give a lecture in Hawaii at the university there, and then 2 years later, 1 year later, 2 years later.
2 years. It's been 2 years already.
Yeah, it happened that you came to stay in Munich for half a year with your students for a whole semester, and he was part of it. And then he always thought he somehow knows this guy, meaning me, and couldn't remember why he knows me. And then when he saw the buildings in Bad Aibling, he said, like, I heard someone giving a presentation about these buildings. And so it happened that he was in my presentation 2 years earlier at the University of Hawaii, isn't it called? Yeah, and then he came visiting TUM and made the connection between me being in Hawaii and he being at TUM just briefly before he left.
Exactly. And I thought this is a great example of that the days of egos and star architecture are gone, and we're returning back to the essence of the built environment. And it's not about people anymore, but it's about subject matters and contact. And so that was a hilarious, I think, proof of evidence for that. So here they are, and we went. It was a very kind of a chilly day, again, towards the end. They enjoyed a lot what they saw. Also, they were in Garching previously, and you were telling me there's something else and potentially also better. Not that this is, again, a bad project. This is a colleague of yours who had done a student dormitory, but it's highly on vegetation, helping to keep you cool, and the vegetation isn't quite up there, literally and figuratively speaking, right? That's fair to say.
True. That's true.
So Garching is also going to get some of your Forschungshäuser, which are research buildings, right? So why don't you talk a little bit more? Hopefully this sort of is a teaser. So hopefully next time on the show, you can share also a couple of your slides, because this goes very much into detail of where buildings might want to go in the future. But maybe just sort of as a little appetizer here, if you want to talk a little bit about what they are about, if you don't mind.
Sure. I mean, let's say generally speaking, what we have designed and what we worked on over the last decades, even myself in my role as engineer at Transsolar. By the way, I need to correct you. I was not a founding partner. I came to Transsolar as the first intern, actually. So became the first intern, and pretty shortly after became partner managing director. But anyway, yeah, we worked on projects all over the world, and what we called sustainable often ended up to be whatever, let's say glass high-rise buildings. And then there was something we figured out over, let's say, the last decades. We put a lot of smart ideas of bioclimatic engineering, you called it. We always called it climate engineering, or adaptive buildings, buildings that react to the outdoor environment, to the sun, to the wind, to the weather, to the winter, to the summer, day and night. So openings for natural ventilation, shadings, shades go down, blinds, etc., etc. So it was always this idea that the building reacts to climate and to the variation of climate. But for whatever reason, it always ended up to be highly glazed buildings. And we did a fantastic building in Winnipeg and other places in Canada for Manitoba Hydro. And we monitored some of these buildings we worked on and figured out something we call performance gap. That it takes, sometimes the Manitoba Hydro building took us 2 years to get the building to operate as designed. And let's say you can continue, like there are studies in the US showing the performance gap between many LEED certified buildings and the reality. We see this also in housing, that the passive house, which we call A+ housing, shows a much higher energy consumption in average. Like a university in Aarhus, Denmark, they looked into 130,000 single-family homes and figured out that the class A+ buildings use between 2 and 3 times as much energy as they are supposed to use. So the more ambitious, the bigger the gap, but also at the same time, we recognize it's driven by the complexity. So buildings became more and more complex, and they're overloaded with stuff. And in addition, the world was falling in love with glass architecture. And to be honest, in the beginning of Transsolar, we also were totally convinced, 100% sure, like you show here, the post tower where we worked with Murphy Jahn from Chicago. The post tower is in Germany. And on the left side, the Nodderby tower, where we worked with Benisch, with Stefan Benisch and his firm, which was in the 90s. Both of them buildings were designed in the 90s, finished, completed in the early 2000 years. But those were the kind of glass buildings and this kind of smart buildings, smart facades. Like we have millions of names. But this kind of adaptive buildings combined with the level of glass doesn't make it any easier. And so we figured out 2 things, and which we have to conclude. The one thing is that buildings became too complex and they don't work when they're completed. Not just buildings which were following our ideas of this adaptive approach, adaptive envelopes, all buildings in general. That's what we figured out. The RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, they were looking into 60,000 school buildings all over Europe and figured out that 95% do not work as designed. So it's a general problem of the industry, and we promise things which just are not true in reality. And the other thing we have to recognize is that this, what we call adaptive or climate responsive building design, integrated into this glass architecture, we always felt is a model towards making the idea of transparent, high-rise, whatever structure, comfortable as well as energy efficient. And so we recognize that nobody is in the world is copying this idea. So nobody takes care of what we are doing. So there are these two handful of buildings worldwide, not only designed by us, but a lot of them designed by us or where we were involved as engineers, as climate engineers. So those are the two things. We believe we develop a role model and we figured out the industry doesn't care what we do. The other thing, our buildings, but construction industry in general, became too complex. Buildings became too complex. We have too many failures. We're let's say, there's a big gap between what we promise in terms of comfort and performance and what we deliver. So that's why we started this research cluster with my colleague Florian Nagler, and too many others are involved, which we call Build Simple. In Germany, Eintach Bauen. So can we reduce complexity in building design? And this is a combination of, let's say, integrating a level of innovation into building design, but also going back to techniques we have used for decades, for centuries in vernacular architecture. Like, why do buildings need to be light? Why can't we have massive walls, thick walls, small windows, increased floor to ceiling height, natural ventilation, good daylight, like very simple, no movable shading, just an adequate amount of glass. And so we use the same idea of adaptive and climate responsive, but instead of things going up and down, opening windows, blah, 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 just mass, just material that controls climate. So we do studies with rammed earth or clay in general. How can clay control climate? A combination of clay and timber. So these kind of things. And that's, I think, fun, but also I think that it has so much more potential to become a model than this high-tech glass architecture of the last decades.
Yeah, and I think it's exciting for our emerging generation, Thomas, because again, like different than in the last century and to dragging along into this one here for too long, people like, Helmut Jahn, God bless him, wherever he is, because he got run over by two cars on his bicycle some few years ago. And Stefan, who's a good friend of yours, Stefan Banish, is around, luckily. But these were the days of worshiping the masters, right? Pretty much. And again, this one, you talked about the passive house. We found ourselves together in the fate and 21st century world atlas of architecture in my sleepy hometown of Hanover. You and Stefan and myself being the only ones, and here we are again. We were at preschool, which is a passive house building, and then you guys with a Nord LB. And this is legendary because I caught you in flagranti in your office at TUM, and I subtitled it here: Thomas's TUM tossing of double, triple paint. You can write it in two ways. Glass curtain wall models, because you were moving within, right, restructuring the institute, the chair. And then I asked you, because these are these models that you always showed, right? And I said to you, are you really getting rid of these? And you said, yes, I am, right? And I'm sure you also probably have then, if not dumped, but maybe put away the big billboard from way back, which is all about the. So it's really an exciting time, I think, for our students to see us or witness us failing. So it's like we're saying, well, we screwed up. In Venice, someone said "fucked up," even more extreme. You remember that?
We would never say that.
Exactly, but it's true. And so now we take the emerging generation along and saying, let's figure out how, to do better. And we don't have any preconceived, mission, because that would be just the same thing but differently, right? But really take them along and say, let's explore together. And I think that's, having been, part of your studio with Bilge, who we will talk about as well, is really exciting, because there isn't any preconceived, there isn't any recipe that can be applied, but it's pretty much a laboratory, the Sense Lab it's called down there, where it's about trial and error, right? Let's experiment, let's find out, and who knows what basically comes out of it. So again, thank you for having taken along the Hawaii students along. This was your newsletter internally, where you said, hey, here they are, let's welcome them, and they go to Tegernsee. And then you're drinking
non-alcoholic beer.
Of course, as you are now, having a sip every now and then. Before the show with Jay, we were introducing him to the song from 1963, There Is No Beer in Hawaii. And then, for them, it was exciting that every day they stayed, it got incrementally cooler. But Aibling was shortly before they left, around Christmas time. So that was already pretty frigid. So they really fully embraced what they don't have back in Hawaii. And I think it's also maybe fair to share with the audience that you once said Munich is actually not your favorite city. This is Sandra, by the way, from TUM, who's the PPS. Practical project students is the great way you figured out to get them without or with the least amount of bureaucracy. And then Sandra was really helping to facilitate that. But I think Bad Aibling you like more than Munich. Is that fair to say?
I have to be careful what I say. I love to be at the university. What I don't love so much about Munich is that Munich can be very pretentious. I know that a lot of Americans say that Los Angeles is pretentious, but there are some similarities. So it's beautiful, it's picturesque, it has a beautiful environment, the lakes, the mountains, but people can be really pretentious. So not everybody, of course. I mean, there are also beautiful, nice people in Munich, like everywhere. Yeah. No, but it was an amazing experience and a great pleasure to have your students being with us. And so there was a little different schedule, academic schedule. So you started in September already, whereas at TUM or at German universities, the academic semester is starting mid-October. So there was a 6-week time difference, which was actually, in a way, quite interesting. So your students already started with, let's say, doing first research with the studio. And then when our students came, we mixed them. And then after your students left, we're still in the studio. So our students haven't had another 6 weeks to finalize the studio. That was interesting. So
Absolutely.
It was quite interesting merge between the University of Hawaii and the Technical University of Munich.
Yeah, and for them it was, of course, interesting to see here stereotomics, as you call, sort of massive construction where you use a lot of thermal mass, which is something that you shouldn't do in the tropics. And it was interesting to see your three laboratory projects. The one is out of ultralight concrete. The next one is solid timber. And the third one is out of clay, out of brick, right? And you've been basically testing. And then we've been talking, or you've been sharing with me. And by the way,
This is the wrong image. Was on the previous.
No, I know. Yeah. So that's the concrete one.
That's the
solid timber one. The brick one, shame on me, I don't have a picture. But then we've been talking that, and by the way, we were Suzanne and I were in Bad Tölz yesterday. And if I'm not mistaken, this is where Florian went to school. That's where he's from. And so then I guess a little bit of Hawaii was added to the next stage, because this is what we call a nice, right? Called balcone here is
a sleeping porch.
Yeah, sleeping porch. And this is something we're currently in shift, in saying that the climate is shifting, is changing. It's going to be more extreme, and then in the summers it means it's going to be hotter. So embracing the outdoor living is actually something that we're currently addressing and exploring in studio together. We can already go fast forward to that slide here.
But let's say, generally speaking, we are convinced that we lost the idea of breathing buildings.
Yeah.
Like vernacular architecture was always about breathing architecture. It was always about openings, natural ventilation, cross ventilation, chimneys, all these kind of things in whatever climate condition. It was always controlled, but it was always about breathing architecture. And it was not only about indoors and outdoors. There was always a transition, buffer zone, different temperature zones, etc., etc. We lost all of this idea the moment when air conditioning was introduced into architecture. Suddenly it was sealed. The facade is considered a line of defense. And mechanical engineers believe that we have to keep an indoor environment under control. So that means when you open a window, you lose control. And that is something, as engineers, you want to avoid. So it was going the total opposite direction. And with our double facades and adapting facades and climate responsive facades, we tried to fix the wrong approach. And that's what became more and more clear to us. And that's why we started the shift to say, like, we need a new image of what sustainable architecture is about. If you now ask ChatGPT, show me a sustainable high-rise building, you see a series of glass high-rise buildings. Some of them are as stupid as you can think of. There is nothing sustainable in there. It's just a story. It's just storytelling. I said we need a different image. We have to bring sense back to the built environment. And so that's the idea of shift.
And in many, you actually, when you came to Hawaii, that was right before the shift inauguration, which we should also say it's a collaboration with Deutsche Gesellschaft für Nachhaltiges Bauen, the German Sustainability Building Council, and its current director, Christine Lemaitre, right? So we should mention that. And then absolutely amazing timing when we then sort of, agreed that you're gonna have us over, then shift kicked off. So it couldn't have been a better timing. So when you came to Hawaii and you were looking, I was driving around, there's actually many proof of evidences for that in some previous ThinkTech Hawaii shows where they see you in my convertible, easy breezy. And I drove you by the newest Howard Hughes high-rise in our Kaka'ako neighborhood. That is also, maybe we want to mention that shift is also not just, it tries to address the two major issues that we have in the world. One is climate, and the other one is culture and social inequity, right? So shift is not interested anymore in the glitzy, in the upscale, but it's really trying to provide decency of dwelling for the people, right? For the little people, for the increasingly too many people who fall through the cracks, right? And so,
Yeah.
right,
So
and
what are
how,
methods really to get to affordable housing?
yeah,
Because like we always believe that with this increasing population worldwide, we have to go high. We need high-rise structure. We need higher density. But the truth is that by far the most people worldwide live in 3 floors and less. The highest density within typical Western world zoning bylaws, the highest density, urban density we can achieve is the 6-story Barcelona block. And so there's always these misperceptions, glass high-rise structure, glass, steel, concrete, density, and there are all these stories coming along which we have to challenge. We need to challenge those stories and this image.
yeah. And I remember then when we drove by this just finished in raw construction building, that it took us to a while to say, well, in Hawaii, that building would be climatically, thermally, comfortably, and maybe even culturally, experientially is finished, or it should be finished. And then throwing the muumuu on. The muumuu is the dresses which the missionaries told the Hawaiians they have to wear because they look too naked. And that's why, we've been calling the glass facades muumuu, because you basically do what you did to the people, you did to the building. You just overdress them because you wanted them look, Western, right? Again, the image of a cool high rise is very uncool because it's a microwave, and and
Yeah,
um,
and what impressed me most, when we were in Hawaii, are these vernacular timber louver windows. Uh,
yeah,
so this is so smart. Like during daytime when it's hot outside, you want to shade, you close it. At nighttime, you open it. So it's shading and let's say operable window for natural ventilation. And it's so smart. It's crazy and so easy.
yeah, it could be and used to be, but not anymore. That's why in the book that we just wrote, that we gave you a copy, there's a whole essay in it for you that's called "The Jealousy of Jealousies." We call
Yeah.
these jealousies. And yes, the wooden jealousy is an absolutely intriguing version, and they were around. And then upon Jimmy Carter passing on the baton to Ronnie Reagan, they went down the drain. And AC, as Ronnie Reagan was doing TV commercials, dragging his family in front of the camera and doing commercials, AC commercials for General Electric. And then they went down the drain. And this is a time to basically and this is for people in Hawaii, maybe it needs, someone, I think certainly like you, Thomas, from outside to make them aware of what they had, because for them it's old and it's considered to be out of style and crappy and all of these, and they can't see it anymore. That's why it's so important to widen the horizon, not just for our students, obviously, especially in these days, critically important to get them out and to get them into another culture, especially here in Europe, where the First Amendment is seems to be worth more than back in the United States. And again, Jay, thanks for you being holding up the First Amendment here and letting us speak about these things. And I think it's really critical to encourage the emerging generation and the profession to basically look at their roots, and that's why basically, and even to the point again with in Hawaii, because you then said humorously, well, Hawaii is maybe not interesting because it's too easy, right? I mean, as a challenge, it certainly it is. And here, the project you did with Florian is not easy. That's because in the winter time you got to stay, without a frostbite, and also in the summertime without a heat stroke. While in Hawaii we only have the latter. But that's part of shift, right? That different than the universal, the international style was applied universally all around the world, and technology was just able to always make it happen based on fossil fuel, by the way. And now a shift has to be applied specifically differently. So these pictures here basically are when Ty was basically here jumping around, was like, okay, that transitions him back to Hawaii, where maybe stereotomics aren't. And so, a weight and thermal mass isn't, but maybe it's weightlessness. So we need buildings that, as you said, they are very light, they're breathable, and they only use the minimum amount of material, because that's also the whole circularity of things that everyone talks about, right? The economy of means, that do the most with the least, and not do the most with the most, which is pretty much how we look back in, maybe we have done it sort of like in the wrong way. We also want to talk about that when Stefan was at Venice and gave his talk, that and he talked about the Nord-Elbe, you had encouraged him, and then he did projects that he's currently doing in Africa. So this is his thermal bath in Bad Aibling as well, where we, after they got really chilled in walking to the Bad Aibling test houses here, then they rewarmed, and they went into the beautiful thermal bath. But again, it's on the expense of this, right? This is greatly displayed. This is all the geothermal, all the whistles and bells to make that temperature that you have mostly year round in the Pacific Ocean in Hawaii, right? But here it's a tremendous effort. It's just basically makes us it made them very sensitive of what they have there, right? It's like when you say the wooden jealousies are such a treasure and they should be brought back, because and so their climate. So if anything, hopefully, your hospitality and your generosity in having them over, and then they saw, like indications of the appreciation of their culture in Bad Aibling while walking. So this restaurant had ohana, and this truck here had tropical cafe.
Nice.
And then, of course, there was the happy hour that we named our show after. And they were obviously, they're not, familiar with the German language, because we teach them in English, right? And they were seriously thinking, this is about you, which we say it is. And they say, yeah, they know that Thomas is so happy.
But you know why they call it happy hour? Because there's a brewery brewing beer which is called Auer, so having the same last name than I have, and so that's where this comes from. Has nothing to do with me, unfortunately.
We don't want to believe that. So looking ahead, you talked about Barcelona, and so let's talk about Valencia, please, which this is where we were. Let's talk a little bit what the plan is in Valencia.
Yeah, I mean, just one thing you said I think is very important to highlight. What we did in Bad Aibling is one example of how Build Simple could look like. And what's this, let's say, new ethic, let's call it, is about. Not the spa, the three buildings, or with the. Of course, they would look very different in Hawaii. Of course, you have a different climate, you have a different culture, you have different materials, etc., etc. And so it's about how should we approach architecture. And I think the one thing all of these buildings worldwide, no matter which climate, should have in common is the idea of breathing architecture, natural ventilation, climate zoning, different climate conditions in your building, these kind of things. If we apply this to our built environment, things could become so simple. I mean, just one more just one more sentence on the glass architecture. This universal style architecture was developed or was possible because of the invention of the air conditioning. And it was like only air conditioning making it possible, and was based on the assumption that we have cheap energy available forever. So that was the premise. And so now, since we recognize that it's not true, that we have cheap energy available forever, but also that it's harming, that it's changing our climate, how can we continue with this wrong idea? So there's an urgency for shift. Let's put it this way. And so that's why we are happy with Shift. We connect different places together. So Shift is not meant to be another lead system, another certification system. It's about establishing a new image for what sustainable architecture should be about. And it's about learning from the global south. I mean, that's the southern world's heritage. They have a much smaller footprint. They know how to cope with the heat without just using air conditioning, etc., etc. So I think we always had this colonial idea that we tell the global south how to design their world. But it's the opposite. I think we should be humble and learn and see what design methods are used in the global south. And so what we want to use is a side of establishing a new aesthetic. In this movement, we also want to connect universities, having a connection of universities worldwide, particularly also connecting with the global south, because sometimes we also say it should not be only learning from the global south, but also learning with the global south. And so we are working with a couple of universities, of course, with Hawaii, but then also with Valencia. When you get to southern Spain, there are already a lot of things in their vernacular architecture we can learn, because the heat waves we now get in Central Europe are very similar to the conditions they have in southern Spain. So pretty soon we need to apply similar ideas in our climate conditions. So that's why we look for these connections, and we have built up a connection to the University of Valencia, and that's why we went there for an excursion to see, like in this last semester we studied the courthouse typology, because we found in previous studies that no matter where we are in the world in hot climate conditions, the courthouse or courtyard typology always plays a big role. It's always a typology which works really well in hot climate conditions. So that's why we want to better understand this, and you find those a lot in southern Spain. So that's why we went there for an excursion, and now we go again next week for the final review, so that we invite people, professors, but also students from Valencia to join our final review. And so we're really excited to be back in Valencia pretty soon, next week already. So that's the idea, but we are in connections with many more universities, also starting to talk to universities. In India, there is a solar decathlon this year in India, where we build up connections to universities in India. We talk to university also in Africa, and yeah, it's growing. The problem is we do this as a hobby. There is no funding. It's all volunteered by people like you, like many others, and we need more people that volunteer their time into Shift to make this a big global movement.
Absolutely. So the picture I was showing with the house under construction is where the students then pointing out, say, hey, this is our Hawaii house that I showed before, right?
Okay.
So this is really a great way of of sensitizing the students for well, it was before, but anyways, you saw it. So this is really interesting as again, and we also want to make this exchange obviously going both ways, right? So not just us, the tropical ones coming here into the temperate, but also the temperate folks going into the tropics, and then really in exposing yourself to the other extreme and really making yourself sort of highly aware of really what's going on. And the courtyard, this is what you and Bilge, you always call her the boss, rightly so, Bilge, the boss.
She's my boss.
Exactly. So you came up with that, and I was happy to jump.
No. Bilge came up with it.
Oh yeah, okay, all right. And so we were very happy too, because you see here some already 5 years ago, we were also excited about courtyards in Hawaii. So while certain things might be very, specific to a place, as your favorite wood blade jealousy, which would not that easily work. And I remember when you first had us over in your institute, you had your staff there, and you were telling them the example about that coolest fenestration, and so that is not that easily adaptable to here in our temperate. One could maybe make a beefed up sandwich one that one fills in with some R-value stuff that you grow or whatever, but the courtyard is really something that is a universal theme, right? That every culture in the world had it. The Romans, the Egyptians, of course the Chinese, and even in Germany there is, again, as we were also tapping into Sepp Roof, who basically built the Chancellor Bungalow. So this is the residential White House wing. We don't want to go to that contemporary part of that being torn down. Let's not go there, but let's stay on the good one back in Germany mid-century, where basically we as Germans were representing us through a courtyard house. That was in Bonn before the reunification, and Sepp Roof, a Munich architect, mid-century modern master, was basically choosing that as to demonstrate what Germany, as having gotten back on the feet thanks to Americans, maybe want to go for. And this is an interesting, and there's obviously backlashes to that sort of topic, that here in Grünwald, which is the even more gentrified little town one over, where Gerhard Matzig, who by the way wants to always wants to talk to you. He's trained as an architect, but is a journalist for the Süddeutsche Zeitung here. And he recently had that article that he says Godzilla Villa, which is that this rapper Bushido bought a 19-room house in Grünwald. So unfortunately, the Sepp Roof sort of seed has not developed as one would have wished. In fact, Grünwald is very much very American in the way that we don't like to see it developing and being big mansion and classicist and all that. But it's time again, ending on a positive note, to remind us of our good sources and roots. And again, the Sepp Roof home and studio in Grünwald, which he also built, also is a courtyard theme. So, and we hope to get into one of these with our students. So there's more exciting things to come. And so maybe for the appetizer, Thomas, for our happy hour, we'll leave it with that for now. And then we're gonna come back to report about, as we've been reporting here, as you see, was the views from Venice, where we reported here on ThinkTech Hawaii about our doings in Venice, and the installation here in particular that you've been doing with Bilge, your boss, for letting the people into the air-conditioned exhibits of how to, save the world. But a little hypocrite because it's all, pretty pictures. As Christina always rightly so says, no more renderings, all in air-conditioned spaces, and you made them really sweat and feel what it really is about and increasingly will be. So maybe we do another show when we come back from Valencia and report on that. And also maybe we do one if there's more, more specifics about some of your slides that refer to Bad Aibling. But also we want to do, and Bilge has already committed and is excited about to share the results of the Courtyard Studio that we did together. So we look forward to that. So thanks for the appetizer happy hour, Thomas. It was a pleasure.
Likewise, really enjoyed it. Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, and see you in Valencia in a couple days.
See you in Valencia.
All right.
Looking forward.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay, so everyone, look forward to have you back in 2 weeks. And until then, you will have DeSoto Brown, who you also enjoyed a lot. Thomas, when you were there and he showed you his museum. And
yeah,
so
that was amazing.
Every time we're not on air, it's DeSoto with UJ and confronting our democracy and that we have to fight for it. So keep doing that. All righty.
Yeah.
Bye-bye,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you, Martin.